Hey everybody, this is Steve from PopCultureMaven.com. We're back with this week's new comic book reviews, and it's a pretty heavy week. A lot heavier than the last few weeks have been. So quite a few. There's a fair amount of new books this week, and so we'll see how they fare. And then we have some returning books, and we'll see how they fare. And then we have even more. So let's get going. So first up, we have Loaded Bible, Blood of My Blood, #1. Written by Steve Orlando and Tim Seeley, with artwork by Giuseppe Caffaro. So, the best way to describe this is think of like Mad Max futuristic, but you have the vampires that are the church have taken over the Vatican, the church, and then Jesus is like this superhero trying to save people and taking them to, I guess you could call it like a wasteland heaven. And that's the basic premise here. And it's kind of interesting. Now, some people are really going to have a problem with this because they use a lot of biblical references and stuff like that. But I personally didn't find anything particularly offensive, but I think it's going to depend on your religious beliefs and stuff. But that being out of the way, I thought it was kind of interesting. I think there was some really good ideas here. I think once that a lot of the concepts are not particularly original, but I think when you kind of take them, mix them all together, and throw them in a blender, and you come up with what Orlando and Seeley did, I think there's some interesting concepts here. And it actually pays off. The first issue is actually paced really nice, sets up, has a really surprisingly good, shock ending for the first issue that kind of like, because it goes along, it's Merry Little Way, and then it throws a big monkey wrench in at the end. And I think it's like, okay, this is an interesting idea. Now you've really taken that idea and kind of thrown it out the door in some respects. So it's going to be interesting to see. I actually liked it. Caffaro's artwork's actually really nice. It's a really good looking book. And I think it's really interesting how they kind of mix all these different things that wouldn't really, it's kind of like oil and water. It shouldn't really mix together, but in a weird way it does. And I liked it. I think it's worth checking out. I was pleasantly surprised. And I think, the other thing that was actually good, it gives you a good reason to come back. And that's always a plus with your first issue. Next up, we have Strange #1. Written by Jed McKay, with artwork by Marcelo Ferreira. So, newsflash, sorry, a bit of a spoiler, but it happened months ago. Stephen Strange is apparently dead, but as we know in comics, nobody's ever really dead. But for the moment, he's dead. And so his ex-wife is now Doctor Strange, or she's taken the mantle. And that is the setup here. I think McKay does a decent job on the script, but I think it's one of those, as I read it and I'm like, this is nice and everything, and it ultimately doesn't really amount to much. There's not really a lot of heft to it. It does its thing, it follows the numbers, but there's really not a big hook for it. Beyond just, it's his ex-wife and Dr. Doom wants to be the Sorcerer Supreme and all this kind of stuff. I mean, the one thing I will give McKay that he definitely wrote the script for Fiera's artwork, because the artwork is really nice on this book and does the whole mystic thing really well and that, but ultimately the story was okay. It wasn't great and it wasn't terrible. It was just kind of okay. It wasn't particularly compelling, and even by the end of the first issue, there wasn't really a huge reason to come back. I'm not saying it's bad, but there wasn't like a good hook for it to like, I really need to read the next issue. It was kind of like, yeah, I'm okay. So it just kind of ends up being okay. Next up, we have Batman Killing Time #1, written by Tom King and David Marquez. Now, I'm a really huge fan of Tom King's work, and it's really interesting here because I like this first issue, but I didn't quite love it. It didn't really have that like grip. I think it's a solid first issue, and there's a lot of setup here, but it was one of those, it didn't really blow me away like Supergirl, Rorschach, Batman, Catwoman. It didn't really strike that chord. But on the other hand, this is a pretty pretty plain Batman story in some respects. It's more of a caper heist type story. So you have Penguin, Riddler, and Killer Croc robbing, this bank, and there's obviously something that they're looking for. And so it's kind of like that kind of setup. So it's one of those where it was like nice and everything, and I enjoyed it and everything, and I do think that there's promise, and I definitely will say that I have faith in King, that I think that maybe with this first issue being very standard, that he might be giving it a flip as it goes along. So we'll see what happens. Marquez's artwork's really nice. It's a really good looking book. And of course, the timing of this book is actually with the Batman film coming out. This is really new reader friendly, which is all really a good thing. You don't really have to know much of anything. It just starts here, and in that respect, I think if you're looking for a Batman book, and I believe it's only 6 issues, this is a good jumping on book to kind of get a feel. And I think in a lot of ways King wrote it that way, where it's very accessible, which is really a smart move, especially with the timing and everything. So I think it's worth checking out. Like I said, it didn't really blow me away, but I thought it was a good, solid first issue. Next up, we have What If Miles Morales Became Captain America -- 1, written by Cody Ziegler with artwork by Paco Medea. So for me, instead of calling it What If Miles Morales Became Captain America, is like, who cares if Miles Morales became Captain America? Because the problem with this is that, okay, he became Captain America. Okay, what's the point? And that ultimately is the problem. It's a perfectly fine read in that respect, but there's really no, okay, it's Miles Morales as Captain America. Whoopee. And that's really the problem, is that apparently the next issue he's going to be Wolverine. And if this first issue is any indication, I didn't care that he was really becoming Captain America, and I certainly really don't care if he's going to be becoming Wolverine. So apparently each issue is going to become a different Marvel character, but Ziegler just, there's no hook here. It's just like, it's like if Tony Stark became Captain America. Okay, that's great. What's your point? And that's really what really sinks this book, is that there really is no point to it. On the plus side, Medea's artwork is actually really nice. It's a good looking book, but ultimately it's just really, it's just really blah. So, it's definitely a skip this week. Next up, we have War for Earth 3, @ 1, written by Robbie Thompson and Dennis Hopeless, with artwork by Steve Pugh, Dexter Soy, and Brent Peoples. So the setup here is that Amanda Waller goes to Earth 3. We don't quite know why, but she basically brings the Suicide Squad to take over. It appears to be that there's a reason that she comes to Earth 3 to maybe take it over. We're not quite sure in this first issue. So this is a crossover book with so it's Teen Titans, Suicide Squad, and I think Task Force Z might be, they're involved too. So that's really the thing. And you have the Injustice League from Earth 3. I think the ultimate thing is it's like, I like the fact that it's not crossing over with like 50 books. There's and then there's like 4 issues total of this crossover, and that's a plus, because you don't have to buy 50 books. But on the other hand, I didn't find it particularly compelling, because I get maybe not necessarily revealing right away why Amanda Waller's there, but we really, this is a double issue book, and we really, by the end of the book, there's not really much to go on beyond that, like, she has a reason to be there. So that's kind of where it just kind of really doesn't go anywhere, because it's like, okay, I get you set up this premise, but what's the point? And unfortunately, it just doesn't really go anywhere. The artwork on, there's three chunks of story done by each separate artist. The art's really nice, and it looks good, but really, I just wasn't really particularly overwhelmed with the story, because it really, like, okay, what's the point? Because you haven't told me the point, and I've now read like 2 issues, and I still don't know what the point is. So that's where that one ends. Next up, we have Rogue Sun @ 1, written by Ryan Parrott and artwork by Abel. So the basic premise of this is there's a hero that he ends up dying early in the issue, in the story, and he leaves the power crystal that creates this suit to his son. Now his son is like a jackass, and he's a bully and all this kind of stuff. So he's like that, awful kid and stuff like that, kind of rich kid type thing. And then he gets his power, and then he's like, he tries to be the superhero, and it doesn't go well. The problem with it is there's nothing new with this story. It's like you've read this a million times before, and unfortunately, Parrott doesn't bring anything new to the story. It's like, okay, his son's an asshole, whoopee. And it's like, oh, eventually he'll probably, be good because he's become a superhero, and he has to learn to be good. It's like, I don't care. And it's very interesting because there's an afterwards by Parrott saying that he grew up on 90s comics. And ultimately, after I read that, I'm like, here's the problem. It's a 90s comic in the fact that it's all flash and no substance. And that's kind of where the problem is. It's just like, you've read this a million times. It's like any other, Image superhero book that came out in the 90s. It's just like, you don't need to care. You just need to buy it. And you look, it's got pretty art. And I will say the artwork's actually really nice, but the story is just so basic and bland that it's just, there's nothing like, I didn't like the kid because he was an asshole. I just didn't like him. So it was just, it's a real mess, and it's just, it's definitely a skip. Next up, we have Radio Apocalypse #2, written by Ram V and artwork by Anand RK. Now, this came out last week. It didn't get my pull, so we're doing it this week. But it should, hopefully your comic shop will still have it. I did really like the first issue, and I think it's a really interesting premise on the whole end of the world sort of thing, where there's these towns and there's this the radio station plays to kind of give people a sense of normalcy. And the second issue, I have to give Ram V, he builds on it nicely, and it's kind of, as with the first issue, it's a story that kind of washes over you. It's like we learn a little bit more kind of about this post-apocalyptic world, but he doesn't quite give it anything away, but we start learning a little bit about the characters in the town and stuff like that, because the first issue was about the girl getting to the town, and so now we're kind of dealing with the characters in the town. It's one of those where I really enjoy it, but I think it's going to be a story that will work really well when you read it all at once. But once again, I do like it, and the artwork by Anand RK it's really gorgeous. I really like the artwork, and I think that the artwork really captures like what Ram V is trying to do with the story, and I'm really enjoying it. But like I said, it's one of those slow burn comics, and it's not going to be for everyone. And I think for some people it might be better off, as long as the story keeps going the way it's going, it might be better to be read in one shot. So, but if you did pick up the first issue, I think you should check the second issue out. I did enjoy it just as much as I did the first issue. Next up, we have She-Hulk #2, written by Rainbow Rao, with artwork by Rogue Antonio. Now, I wasn't really super impressed with the first issue of this, but I really like She-Hulk, so I was willing to give it another chance. And the second issue is fine, but it's an odd second issue. Because Jen is at the apartment, Wasp apartment that she's lent to her, and Jack of Hearts just shows up, and it's just kind of like this story that would be like a nice side story, but I don't know that it's a whole issue. The other problem is that you've just started this, and you've kind of already hit a road bump with the second issue, where the story is fine, but the second issue doesn't add anything to the overall story. It's just this side story of Jack of Hearts, and he tells a story of how he got trapped in space, and he sucked Jen's gamma energy and all this, and it's all nice and everything, but it's like, okay, we're in the second issue. Where is the story going? Because she was a lawyer that's now working at a law firm that she can't afford an apartment, and then all of a sudden you've got this story, and unfortunately Rao just really, for me, dropped the ball here, because this is, it's not that the story's bad, it just doesn't make sense for a second issue. Antonio's artwork's actually nice, but at this point, I as much as I love She-Hulk as a character, that's it. I just don't think it's worth picking up. Next up, we have Monkey Prince #2, written by Jean Luen Yang and artwork by Bernard Chang. Now, I did like the first issue of this, but I think I struggle a little bit with the second issue. I still like it. I think the problem was that it we're taking a little too long to explain his story, and I think where it kind of struggled a bit for me was having Batman come in this early. It kind of felt out of place. Now it does have Robin is now at the school trying to find out who the Monkey Prince is, and that part's interesting. But I think just the battle with Batman right at the beginning of the book, I don't know that it was a particularly good choice. But I don't think it was quite fatal, but it definitely, it really, I did struggle with the second issue compared to the first issue. I really like the first issue. Second issue's good. I just think it just missed the mark a little bit, but because I do like, I love the creators. I love Yang's, his writing, and Chang's, the artwork's actually really, really nice. But I think it just kind of, like, it was an odd second issue. It wasn't a fatally bad second issue. It was just an odd second issue. So I'm really kind of struggling. Hopefully the third issue will kind of bring it back. Next up, we have Nocterra #8, written by Scott Snyder with artwork by Tony S. Daniel. So we're now kind of we're in that second story arc, and we're now learning, in this issue, we actually learn that there's kind of fractions of these darkness creatures. There's some that aren't necessarily, they're not necessarily good guys, but they're not necessarily bad guys. And one of them actually figures out what's really going on and why these creatures, darkness, have actually come to Earth. And so he's actually made a proposition to team up with the surviving humans to I guess go after this creature. So it's an interesting issue. It's kind of a bit, because we're in the middle of the story in a way, even though we're in the second part of the first story arc. So there's a lot of exposition in this issue, but it's exposition that really is going to make the story go forward. And Snyder is really, I still find the story interesting. I like how it's got great twists and turns. There's things you don't expect. And he's really doing a good job. And then, of course, Daniel's artwork is just gorgeous. This is a really good-looking book. It's just it's a good-looking book with solid story. I'm still enjoying it, and each issue is like, okay, you give me a good reason to come back. And that's, at this point, when you're like in issue 8, I always want to be able to come back. Next up, we have Star Squadron #4, written by Mark Russell and with artwork by Steve Lieber. So last issue, we found out that the corporation that owns the Star Squadron basically is trying to sell them off, and so to limit the amount of cash that they're burning through, they tell Red Tornado that he needs to fire like half the staff. So he doesn't want to do that because he's a nice guy, and so once again, this is the whole this book is very much satire. It's satire. And you have to understand, not only is it satire of, superheroes, but it's like the Legion of Substitute Heroes. These are not the top ranked heroes, but it also is such a skewing of corporate America and how things are run. And the irony of the timing of this book is insane because of the way that corporate America, people are finally discovering that, or hopefully somewhat, that corporate America is screwing employees and everybody. So Mark Russell's really nailed the timing on this, and just it's really great. It's one of those books that, I think some people expect it to be like laugh out loud, and it's not. It's actually that subtle satire that doesn't necessarily, make you go ha ha out loud, but there's a lot of really funny stuff, but it's very subtle in that, and I really like it. And Lieber's artwork, he is like the perfect artist for this. He really captures, especially Red Tornado. I mean, Red Tornado has never been like this human before in a lot of respects, and I really, not only I have to give props to Russell, but Lieber really just brings him to life, and all the other characters, and just the expressions he puts on their faces are absolutely amazing. I really love this book. It's just, if you're looking for satire, you cannot do any better than this. Next up, we have Arkham City: The Order Order of the World #6. Written by Dan Waters with artwork by Danny. So this is the final issue. This really ties up everything, and I really, it's hard to review a last issue because I don't want to give it away, but I've really enjoyed this, and I like the fact that it first and foremost, it has not been a Batman story, which is really great because, once again, we've had so many Bat books. We have a new one this week too. But that's what's really been fascinating, how it really has told this unique Arkham story, but not in actually Arkham, because Arkham was destroyed and most of the inmates were killed by the Joker during the Joker War. But it's fascinating how Waters has come up with this theory that Gotham was really Arkham Asylum, all of Gotham in the way it was laid out. And it's just been a really fascinating story, and he's wrapped it up quite nicely, but it's one of those where it's a very kind of bittersweet ending, where it ends but it really doesn't, because there's still, it's not a final ending, which, I mean, you're satisfied in the ending, but it's one of those ironic ending, I guess is kind of one of the best ways to put it. So I really liked it, and of course Danny's artwork is just absolutely stunning. It's really a good, it's a great looking book. If you've missed any of this, I really you should check out the trade when it comes out, because it's really good. I really enjoyed this mini series, and I think it's well worth checking out. Next up, we have Dark Knights of Steel #5, written by Tom Taylor with artwork by Yasmin Paturi. So last issue was kind of like an origin of like Batman, Bruce Wayne. So this builds upon that, but I like how Taylor is kind of, we're still learning about the characters. Like, this issue has a really good Poison Ivy and Harley. And so what it is, it's still in a lot of ways the same characters, he's taking them in a different direction, partially because of the period, but he's also kind of playing a little bit with their characters in the setting, in this medieval setting. So it's really interesting. And of course, we've learned, and I won't spoil it, but we've learned a secret about Bruce Wayne, and that comes to fruition in this issue, and there's a great cliffhanger. And I love how he's basically taking the DC universe, and he's really, in a lot of ways, not changing it, but just it's like, instead of telling it this way, he's just tilted it a little bit, where he's telling a different story, and they're still the same characters. He's just putting them like in a different situation. It's really fascinating how I've been really surprised by this book. It's been a big surprise. The artwork, Paturi's artwork is amazing. It's a great looking book. And it's one of those where not only do you have great artwork, but the story just they are perfect together. It's just one of those perfect writer artists, and it's really working. Really check it out. There's a reprint of the first 3 issues that came out this week, so 4 and 5 are out. So if you can catch up, it's surprisingly good book. Next up, we have The Nice House on the Lake, #7, written by James Tynan IV, with artwork by Alvarado Martinez Bueno. Excuse me. So this the 7th issue is kind of interesting, because we're kind of learning more about Walter, and it's more of, in a way, a flashback to, like, it's kind of centered on him and a couple of the other characters, and it's very interesting because they're starting to try to maybe figure out Is did the world come to the end? Is he playing? I mean, we still don't know quite what's going on in the outside world, but yet we still have this throwing these seven people in a room basically, or in the world, where they're stuck, and they're not necessarily trying to get out, but they're trying to figure out what's really going on. Are they really the last people on Earth? And so this is more this issue is very much a character study issue, where we're kind of like we're still in like that middle part where we're still learning about Walter and some of the other characters. So it's really fascinating. And I'll tell you, Bueno's artwork is it's stunning. I mean, Tynan is writing it's interesting because it's like, it's horror, it's kind of science fiction and stuff, but it's also like, kind of like, in some ways, like a murder mystery. Not that there's a murder, but kind of like you're revealing things slowly, and each character has these different takes, and it's really been very fascinating. I really enjoy this book, and it's one of those books that I'm very excited to go back, when it's finished, to go back and read it all at once again, to kind of let it really, I mean, each issue is just absolutely amazing, and this is a must read book. And finally, this week we have crossover number 12, written by Donny Cates and Robert Kirkman, with artwork by Jeff Shaw, along with Phil Hester and Klaus Janson inking Hester. So the first part, so we learned last issue that Negan has came into the story, so he's now part of the crossover story. So the first part of the book is actually written by Kirkman and drawn by Hester and Janson. And so what it is Negan goes to Robert Kirkman's house. That's like, he refers to him as like, he's like the comic version of Michael Jackson's Neverland. And it's true, because, he has, Action Comic, 3 copies of Action Comics #1, and like a dinosaur, and like almost like the giant penny in the Batcave sort of thing. And so, as we know with this story, that writers are being killed, so Negan takes out Lucille and just and puts an end to Robert Kirkman. So, but it's interesting because Robert Kirkman is actually talking to his character as Robert Kirkman, and it's very interesting. And then of course, then we go back to the underground prison, and so now we have, so Donny Cates actually escapes, and that leads up to the next issue, which appears it might be the final issue, or at least the final part of this story, the first story arc. So it's really interesting, and I really I love how not only Donny Cates has delivered this story, but the fact is he's getting, like, Robert Kirkman wrote, The Walking Dead, and Michael Bendis wrote Powers. I like how he's inviting these other writers to write their characters within the story, which is very fascinating. It's kind of a genius idea, and also having like Phil Hester and Klaus Janson draw the Robert Kirkman part is actually a really good idea, because then that way it kind of fits a style where then Shaw goes back and does the regular story. So there's that visual continuity between the two, that are different, but they fit. It really makes it fit together well. I'm really loving this book. I really have been quite surprised where Cates is really taking it. And if this issue is any indication, I cannot wait for the next issue. It's really, really fascinating. I've really, really loved this book. That's going to do it this week. I think we burned through them pretty quick, mostly because we unfortunately had, I'd say, a fair amount of duds this week. And it's always sad. I do not relish in the pleasure of not liking a book, because I know that both writers and artists put their heart and souls into comics. Sometimes it just doesn't work. And sometimes it doesn't work for me, and it might work for you. I'll say that, because there's things that I might like, you may not like, and there's stuff that you may not like that I really like. So it's always subjective, but ultimately, The thing I always say is please support your local comic shop. I do. I go every week. My public service announcement, as always, I get all my comics at Pulp Fiction Comics in Long Beach, California. Ryan runs a great store. Annie and Eduardo are fantastic. Great customer service. They have a great pull service. And they offer discounts on their pull service, and they offer 30% off graphic novels every day. It's great store. There's also a sister store, Pulp Fiction Culver City. It's a separate store, same name, run by Chris and her team. So if you live if you're up in the LA area, in that area, highly recommend checking them out. It's a great store. Both stores are fantastic, run by really great people. And as you know, and really just to support your local comic shop, make sure it's really important to support your local comic shop, because they're small business. That's the other thing. So, and as always, please be safe out there. I know things are better health wise. I don't think COVID's not going to go away, but please be safe. Get vaccinated if you can, get boosted if you can. Just be safe out there. And as always, we end our shows. Please be kind. Kindness doesn't cost anything. Kindness is great. And of course, we're not going to touch on real world events, but right now, kindness is definitely, I think, the most important thing. Just be kind to each other out there. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. And just we can get through this. Take care of yourselves. We'll do it again next week. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and take care. This is Steven from PopCultureMaven.com signing out. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.